Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Alchemy of Sex Summit, Essential Secrets to Satisfaction and Connection. I'm your host for this free event, Willow Brown, and I'm a Chinese medicine doctor and international Taoist sexuality teacher. And I am really excited to introduce you to my next speaker because not only is she an incredibly gifted practitioner of functional medicine and Chinese medicine, but a very intuitive and aligned being. And I'm also very proud to say that she's one of my very best friends. So let's give a warm welcome to Brie Wieselman. Welcome, Brie. So good to have you.
Thank you. It's so fun to be here. Yeah, this is great.
Awesome. So Brie works with busy, inspired women leaders and entrepreneurs to optimize their health when they've gotten burned out so that they can have more powerful impact in the world and take full pleasure in their successes. She focuses on reprogramming hormones, digestion, and detoxification systems by working with functional medicine and nutrition. For the past 4 years, she's worked with hundreds of clients living anywhere from Dubai to Iceland, from Wall Street to Mozambique, empowering them with a personalized map for understanding and transforming their health. Besides women's health, she specializes in helping people with digestive problems such as IBS and IBD. Brie's philosophy is that our physical health is the platform for our emotional, spiritual, and professional growth. And I could not agree more. And so today with Brie, we're going to be talking about the 5 key hormones that make or break your sex drive. So Brie's a bit of an endocrinologist specialist and loves to talk about sex and hormones almost as much as I do. Every time we get together, we definitely talk about sex every single time. So she's going to give you the lowdown on those 5 key hormones.
Thanks for that intro, Wells. And yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I love you so much. So yeah, it's all about pleasure, right? It's all about pleasure. I mean, our health ultimately is about our pleasure in my point of view. And I use the word pleasure very broadly because pleasure could be like doing something good to make the world a better place. You could feel pleasure from that, or you can feel pleasure because you're like seeing a glass of wine on the counter and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm about to have a sip of that. Or maybe it's like, some man or woman who just walked into the room and you just feel all yummy. So it's all about pleasure. It's a reflection of our aliveness, don't you think?
Absolutely. Oh, for sure. Yes.
So I like to think about this, it's interesting because like when we use the word health, so often it's like, okay, I'm talking about these things like digestion and detoxification, these very like sciencey kind of body systems. But I think that, more and more what's being included in the conversation is, especially in the realm of functional medicine or acupuncture and Chinese medicine and other holistic medicines, is this acknowledgement of libido and the role that plays. Because essentially, and especially, I work with a lot of women, I work with men too, but I always ask this question, about like sex drive and desire, because it often just gets swept under the rug, and it's not unimportant. It's actually like the canary in the coal mine, because on the simplest level, when our body is healthy, it wants to reproduce. And even after our reproductive years are done, like if we are in menopause or menopause, it's still natural, if you're in a healthy body, to have some, desire for sensuality and sexuality. So I think it's so important, and it gets just skipped over. So that's why I'm excited to talk about this today.
It's like, it's the crux of, in our opinion, my opinion, also yours, it is like, in Chinese medicine, it's Jing Qi is the essence of life. Your sexual energy is, we call it Jing, Jing, and that's the essence of life. And when your essence is full, when that cup is full and your essence is radiating, then like everything else follows. Everything else becomes easier and more magnetic to you in order to bring things to your life. So let's dive into those 5 key hormones.
All right. So, okay, so I have these conversations. If, let's say, a woman comes to me and she's it's, you know, one of the things we talk about is that she just doesn't have any desire for sex, or has a hard time orgasming, or, you know, starts to be sensual with someone and then kind of gets a no, not because of the person or because of something emotional, but just her body's like, this is not happening. So in those conversations, before we dive into hormone world, I just want to, I think this goes without saying, that obviously, you know, there's a lot of times when we lose our drive or lose our interest in sex because we either have like an emotional issue or a trauma, a history of trauma, or maybe an emotional issue with our partner that hasn't been communicated or resolved. So there's all of that. And that's not necessarily distinct from the hormonal piece, but it's just something that, you know, I would always touch on. So let's dive in. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a bunch of different hormones because they're all like this beautiful symphony and everyone has a role to play, but we can actually kind of unpack them and understand a little bit about each one. So one of the main hormones that I want to talk about is called DHEA. And DHEA is one of the two major hormones that's produced in our adrenal glands in response to the signal from the brain. It's actually also produced in the brain to some extent. And in general, DHEA is a hormone that as we age, you know, it's our most abundant hormone in circulation, but it peaks in our 20s and then it tends to gradually decline as we get older, and faster in some people than others, depending on genetics or stress, disease, things like that. And so in general, we want to sustain levels that are on the higher end of the normal range, ideally. And what we've noticed in people is that, you know, people with higher DHEA within the normal range tend to have less depression, better function as they age, like they can take care of themselves. It protects us from immune suppression, especially the immune suppression that comes when we're under stress during a period of high cortisol in response to stress in our life. It prevents osteoporosis. It helps us maintain muscle mass. So there's all these good things that it helps us do. And the other interesting thing is that many other hormones are derived from DHEA, such as our estrogen and testosterone to some extent. It drops dramatically under stress, and so do the downstream hormones. So that may be part of the reason why, you know, stress can kill our libido. It's probably something to do with that. And then when we're talking about, you know, it's highly involved in sex drive, but also in orgasm, orgasm, and in sex appeal. So interesting. Yeah. So in studies, now I'm going to mention a couple of things that are in reference to studies, and I just want to just kind of have this disclaimer. All of the studies were done under the perspective of it being either heterosexual relationships or people who identify as cisgender. You know, that's kind of the evidence we have so far, but hormones are hormones and bodies are bodies. So to some extent, we can just kind of, you know, assume that it plays true for everybody. So anyway, in women who had higher levels of DHEA, they tended to have higher rates of sexual desire and arousal. So I test for this hormone, you know, whenever low libido is part of someone's health issues. I tend to do that using a full adrenal panel that tests for a lot of different hormones. We can talk about that later. But the other thing that's really interesting about DHEA is that we can also use it vaginally, like topically. I'll sometimes use it if women are in perimenopause or postmenopause for dryness and fragile tissue. Yeah, so it's a great hormone to use for that locally. Okay.
So DHEA, so that could be a huge indicator of your actual sex drive, your desire for sexual play and intercourse, and just exploring sexually with your partner. And then also your sex appeal, like how you feel sexy walking through the world. That's fascinating.
I know. Well, and here's another wild thing is oral contraceptives, like the birth control pill, they lower our DHEA. And so I'm going to take you on a little story. So most of our pheromones, like our sexy smell, is derived from DHEA. And these are the scents that, like, in the animal world, it dictates attraction and mating. And in humans, we have a little bit more conscious choice about it, but like it's still involved, you know, there's still a pheromone thing. And so interestingly, what happens is that birth control pills change a woman's sense of smell, and they could actually affect or impact what types of men women tend to desire. This has actually been shown in research. So a man's smell is related to something called the MHC genes, and these are major histocompatibility. So this actually, what this is it's how it dictates how your immune works. Mm-hmm. And so what was observed is that women tend to prefer the sense of men whose MHC genes are different from theirs. And it probably evolved naturally to like help us make stronger babies that are likely to survive. Yeah. And so couples with different MHC genes are less likely to be related to each other, and their children are usually born with more robust immune systems. This makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. However, when women are on the pill, they undergo this shift in preference towards women who share similar MHC genes. One of the big reasons I'm not a fan of the pill. But anyway, it's kind of interesting. And it had to do with smelling the T-shirts that these men had worn for 2 nights. And
that was a fascinating study.
Yeah. So anyway, okay. So that's kind of what I have to say about DHEA.
Okay. DHEA, number 1. Comes from the adrenal glands, also comes from the brain. Is it also made in the gut?
Yeah, it's actually, you can find DHEA around the body. It's found in the ovaries and testes to some extent. I don't know that it's actually manufactured in the gut, but there are hormones that resemble it. So,
okay. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay. So number 2 hormone is oxytocin. This is one a lot of us have heard of, right?
Yeah, that's one. Yeah.
Yeah. Oxytocin is, you can think of it as our like love and bonding molecule, and it's triggered through touch. So it goes up if you hug someone, if you hold hands, if you have sex. It goes up even more with orgasm. It also goes up if you hold a baby, or even if you have a dog, if you have a pet. So if you look at the dog, your oxytocin goes up, and then the dog's oxytocin goes up. I think that's why we love to watch like puppy and kitty videos on because we want to feel better. So it spikes in arousal and orgasm. And if you're in love, even just thinking about the person you're in love with makes your oxytocin levels go up measurably. And it evolved around parenting and maternal bonding. You know, it's triggered strongly by breastfeeding, and it actually causes the uterus to contract and orgasm, and also during the birthing process. And it lowers stress and lowers our rational thought. That's like this whole like falling in love thing where you're just like wild with abandon. That all makes sense because those hormones are going to essentially make it more likely for a child to survive in the world if both parents, are attentive to it, if especially the mother bonds, if the mom and father bond to some extent, So it kind of makes sense why we have that hormone. So that's one that can be nurtured just behaviorally.
And oxytocin comes from the pituitary gland.
Yes.
Up in the head.
Yep.
So DHEA, oxytocin. And oxytocin, another thing about it that obviously but when women are delivering babies, there's a synthetic form of oxytocin, commonly known as pitocin, and that's what can help get those contractions going to get the baby out. But yeah, just if you didn't know already, that pitocin is actually a synthetic form of oxytocin. So what gets the baby in also gets the baby out.
Yeah. Exactly. I know, it's amazing. Amazing what we do.
It is. Bodies are amazing. Third one.
So let's talk about hormone number 3. Let's talk about estrogen.
Yeah, this is a good one.
Yeah. So estrogen, so I love talking about estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone when it comes to sex drive because they're all really unique. And you can actually kind of relate to these, especially as women, because there are different times during each part of the menstrual cycle where these hormones might be higher or lower. So you can relate it back to that later. So estrogen is like the feminine hormone. That's how we think of it. Men have it too, but women have more of it. Tends to make women curvy and softer, both physically and emotionally. And it's that hormone that, makes a woman glow. When we have a lot of it at different times in the month, women will tend to have like a brightness or a glow, or, their skin will look soft. It also makes breasts and hips and more fat on the butt. So all the things we want, as and in studies, heterosexual men rated women with higher estrogen levels to be more attractive. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah. More curvy, more fat, more sex.
Right? Yeah. And then another interesting thing is that how much of it a woman has will influence how she smells.
Mm.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Kind of falls into the pheromone category.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of our sex drive, it increases the part of a woman's sex drive that's called the receptive sex drive. So this is the part that makes you kind of like seductive or essentially interested and open to penetration.
That's really interesting. I had not heard of that before.
Yeah, estrogen says like, take me now, you know?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That receptive side, you know, that's one of the things I'm always really kind of teaching and putting out there is like, we've done enough penetrating the world and getting our, you know, going out and getting it. Like, let's just receive now. Let's just sit back and receive. So
Yeah.
the estrogen hormones support you in that receptivity in your life.
They do. Yeah. I know we've talked about this so many times, but just the kind of like, you know, how did we say it? Like, you know, women are not small men, you know?
Yeah. Men are not hairy women.
Yeah. So
despite what we may think of them.
Yeah. So like, it's awesome that we're all out here, like, you know, that kind of like the roles have started to equalize in a lot of ways. And like, you know, women are, you know, heads of companies, heads of countries, you know, and doing all the myriad roles that women can do just as equally as men. But then there's this piece about kind of the way we do what we do.
Right.
That, you know, we talk about this a lot with respect to Chinese medicine, like the yin versus the yang, and how, you know, by definition, yang relative to yin is more aggressive and seeking and active, and then, you know, the yin being more receptive and static. And so I think that sometimes, you know, we could think about this almost energetically, where a lot of the times I'll notice that, like, if I'm working with a woman who is what I call like my type AAA, right? You know, they're like, go, go, go. If you have something that you need to get done, you know that she's going to be your first pick because she's just going to handle it, you know, like that kind of person. So amazing at what they do and how they do it and what they can accomplish in the world. But occasionally I'll have a lot of women who are, have, you know, trained themselves to function like that in the world, kind of lose touch with being in their body or being in a place of sensuality until they, you know, really wind up kind of, nurturing and fostering that in different ways, sometimes hormonally and sometimes other ways, you know. And I think all of us, just by virtue of how our world is, need more time relaxing, being receptive, you know, going into that parasympathetic dominant state like you know, help people do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so powerful. I think it's like, it's an utilized power that both men and women have, since we both have this lovely estrogen hormone. However, like, especially women have this really strong power in their receptivity. You know, it's like, just put the crown on your head, sit on your throne, and let it come to you, sister. Like, you can do that. Try it, see what happens, you know.
Okay, so that is the voice of estrogen.
Exactly.
Totally. And then we have progesterone.
Okay.
So progesterone is like the balancing act to estrogen. We need them both. We need them all to be in proper ratios, you know, and there is a fluctuation where, you know, one of them is dominant and then the other one's dominant. And there's different times that this happens to basically create our menstrual cycle so that we can reproduce and, you know, carry babies.
Right.
But when it comes to sex drive, progesterone, I think of it as basically the like cock blocking or clam jamming hormone.
I like the clam jammer.
Exactly. So what I mean by that is it basically inhibits your sex drive to a large extent. In fact, there's an herb, I know you know this herb, it's called Vitex, Agnus castus, or also known as chaste tree berry. And that is an herb that we can use to help promote progesterone production in women who are of reproductive age, because it helps signal the pituitary and the conversation, the dialogue it has with the ovaries. And it reestablishes that. But it tends to raise progesterone. And so historically, one of its uses was that they would give it to monks to block their sex drive.
Wow. Male monks?
That's why it's called chaste tree berry.
Oh, no way. I never knew that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Actually, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but also super important that your progesterone levels are strong enough, especially if you're going for pregnancy or anything like that.
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, so there's actually this, so
balance.
Yeah, there's a balance. There's a balance. It has to be about the balance. So, you know, so actually just a couple more things about the sex drive and progesterone. Like there's a synthetic version that has been used as a treatment or punishment in sex offenders. It's called chemical castration.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
But that same synthetic progesterone, which is called progestin, it's the main ingredient in all the types of birth control, you know, that have progesterone in them.
Right.
And so I'm not even going to get started on birth control because obviously
another topic. That's another book to write.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, it's kind of ironic. It's like, oh yeah, that's great birth control. Just kill your sex drive. It doesn't always work out like that. But anyway, progesterone has some calming, sedative effects. It's like the calm, happy, everything's okay kind of hormone. In women who don't have enough of it, sometimes like they'll run more anxious or irritable or like not be able to sleep as well, especially premenstrually. So sometimes promoting it can help with that. And it's naturally higher. We want it to be higher in the second half of the menstrual cycle after ovulation. It's made from basically where the scar that the egg pops out of, the follicle. And so this makes sense biologically because really there's no really good reason to encourage sex once the ovulation event is over for the month because a woman can no longer conceive. So
Right.
just from a reproductive standpoint, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, if you have high progesterone, it actually can numb the erogenous zones and you're more likely to have like a duller orgasm or less sensation or just to need a lot more stimulation to feel pleasure. This is less true when progesterone production is balanced with estrogen. So that seems to balance this effect out. So some women will still have the same level of interest during the second half of their cycle. Or they may find that they might be more interested in like cuddling and connecting, but maybe too tired or not have the motivation to actually like go for the orgasm.
And so in my experience, in my clinical experience, I see a lot more estrogen dominance than progesterone dominance. I'm just curious for you, like, is that also true for you, or do you see plenty of people with too much progesterone?
I would say that I almost always exclusively only see it in one scenario, and that's when a woman comes in and she's been taking progesterone cream.
Right. Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're in an epidemic of estrogen dominance, excessive estrogen, which also isn't good. We want lots of it, but we don't want too much of it, right? Just because of our environment and some of our food sources and, impact on our gut and our liver, which help regulate those things. So I see that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so that's an important thing for our listeners to know and to seek professional advice and testing if you are curious about what's going on with your hormones, because I've seen so many people just be like, oh yeah, I just went to the local health food store and got some progesterone cream and just started using it. And you really don't know what you're doing to your body unless you have a professional supporting you in that realm. So get support.
And I don't know if you see this, but I see this a lot where a woman will start progesterone cream. Like she'll just go get it, having heard, oh, this is good for you. And she's not wrong to think that probably her progesterone is low relative to her estrogen because we just, that's common. And also it's natural, actually, like in the later reproductive years, as we start to creep towards perimenopause, the first thing to take a nosedive is the progesterone. So we naturally become estrogen dominant to some extent. And progesterone supplementally can absolutely help, but it like you said, needs to be done with testing and supervision, in my opinion. And I think that what'll happen is that someone will start a cream and they'll feel amazing for like a month or two.
Yeah.
They'll be like, whoa, that just totally helped because they were like thirsty for it. Their receptor sites were thirsty, but then they accumulate too much of it because it's a fat soluble cream. And so then 3 months in or 4 months in or so, it's like all the symptoms start coming back, but now it's for a different reason.
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah. That we could keep going on that for like another hour, but we're going to get to our fifth hormone.
Okay. So let's move on to prolactin.
Okay. Ooh, good one.
Hormone that's associated, with nursing and pregnancy. It's high in nursing. It triggers milk letdown, and it also gets higher during pregnancy. it tends to lower our sex drive, especially the type of the part that's the aggressive or seeking behavior. And so we can still maintain some of the receptive type sex drive depending on what the estrogen levels are. But it's long been documented that in general, women have less sex drive when they're breastfeeding, and then when they stop, it tends to bounce back. Now, everything's unique and their hormone array is going to be unique, but that's like a general thing that we'll see. And prolactin can have the same effect in men. So it's less common that it's high because, you know, obviously when men aren't lactating or giving birth. But when you find high prolactin in a man, it's usually due to a type of tumor that secretes prolactin in the brain, in the pituitary. And men will the key sign is that men will start to have fluid come out of their nipples. And the same type of tumor can happen in women. And in women, high prolactin will also cause your period to be missing for long periods of time. So that's like another thing. So what's interesting is that, and I'm going to talk more about this hormone or neurotransmitter later called dopamine. But what's interesting is that promoting the neurotransmitter dopamine opposes prolactin and helps us to lower the levels. So when it's too high on a lab, we'll either give dopamine promoting amino acids or herbs, or that same herb Vitex that we were talking about before also helps to lower prolactin and support dopamine in the brain. So
yeah. It's so amazing too, the way that the brain, like what's going on up here is just, it's telling everything else what to do. You know, you said this at the beginning of our talk, it's a symphony. Yeah. It's like this beautiful conversation that's always happening. And I do really believe, and I know you do too, Brie, it's like the more clear we are in our minds, the more open our pineal gland, our pituitary gland is, the better our whole symphony works inside of ourselves.
Oh yeah, there's just less static. So the pathways of communication function with ease. That's about it. I absolutely agree.
Yeah, it's so cool. I always like to explain that hormones are like little delicate little babies, you know, and like they need a lot of care and attention. And when you give them a lot of care and attention, they do well. And when you give them like no care, no attention, they don't do well, you know, and they don't grow up well. So
true, especially in today's world.
Yeah, they're sensitive little beings.
Sensitive, yeah. So sensitive, let's talk about testosterone.
Okay, testosterone.
Okay, so testosterone is, you know, classically we think of it as the male hormone. And that makes sense. So men have higher levels of it, typically. Women have some also. We want women to have some. It helps us build and maintain muscle, and it gives us that aggressive drive. And this is just for sex. This is for life, like for achieving goals, for, you know, getting that job, for, you know, accomplishing something, but also sexually. So this is the like, I'm coming for you kind of part. And so rare. Yeah. So it can also make you competitive or violent. You know, evolutionarily that made you more likely to guard your turf, right? So and in terms of sex, it makes you want to initiate, dominate, pursue. And it also governs the drive for genital sex and orgasm, as opposed to like emotional and connective and other aspects. But interestingly, higher levels of testosterone tend to increase behavior that seeks to be in isolation as opposed to being like with the tribe. Mm-hmm. And so maybe this is an explanation for like the phenomena of man caves. Mm-hmm. But hypothesized because of this, it also promotes masturbation. Mm-hmm. So like women with higher levels of testosterone tended to masturbate more often or be more interested. Yeah, because that's kind of like having sex, but also being alone, right? Yeah. It generally promotes the individual versus the group. You know, so it's less likely to drive you towards being in a committed relationship.
Mm-hmm. If your testosterone levels are too high.
Yeah. And if you don't have enough, you can get depressed. And if you have too much, then people can get like irritable or angry easily. Mm-hmm. Now, here's where I want to talk about dopamine, because there's this intricate relationship. So testosterone increases the activity of the brain chemical or neurotransmitter dopamine in our brains. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter that also promotes sex drive. And this is basically because it works by helping us to anticipate pleasure. So therefore, then we have the motivation to take a certain action to get the reward. And so this is called, we have heard the reward center of the brain talked about. It's basically all of the dopamine activity in the brain. So it's involved in addictive behavior. So when dopamine goes up, it goes up when we get something that we want. And that could be, whether it's smoking a cigarette or cocaine or looking at your smartphone, and social media and, or orgasm, goes up in orgasm.
Right.
So I just think of it as like the desire hormone. If we have low dopamine, then people are going to tend to have like a flatter affect, just kind of be flatline and lack interest and enthusiasm, not have get up and go. They could be sleepy. So low dopamine can be a cause of fatigue. But they just don't have excitement. They're just not like, yeah, let's do this, right? So with sex, it's not so much that it is the actual drive that's more testosterone. It's like the thing that makes us equate sex with pleasure. Otherwise, it would just be a body function, like eating. It would just, eating can be pleasurable too, but like peeing, it's just like, okay, this is one of the things I do for survival. Right. Yeah. And so testosterone plays a huge role in women's sex drive, going back to the testosterone piece, for sure. We notice that when women's testosterone is low, often that's one of the things to go. And so there's a big trend in recent years about testosterone replacement therapy for libido in women. But what's interesting is it doesn't always work. In fact, it often doesn't work. And so I think that it may be that these women also have low dopamine more than low testosterone or equally. And so the testosterone may be raising that, but not actually increasing the dopamine adequately. So maybe, more dopamine helps restore that.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's almost like the dopamine is really what you want to be looking at and addressing rather than like what's underneath it, right?
Yeah. And I think of that especially when women have a difficulty achieving orgasm and they have low testosterone. Like, so maybe the interest is there, but they're just like, yeah, it just doesn't feel the same. And
right. So it has to be a balance. It's kind of like a little bit more like we have the estrogen progesterone balance. We need the testosterone dopamine balance.
Yeah, in a way, I think so. Yeah, they definitely are.
My yin and yang mind wants to put it on.
Body. Yeah. So if we talked about dopamine and its connection to testosterone, we have to talk about serotonin. Because serotonin is the balancing act to dopamine in the brain. Those are our two main brain chemicals. So that's like what we have the most of in the brain, and they tend to regulate a lot of our other brain chemicals downstream. So everyone's heard of serotonin. We think of it as our happy chemical or happy neurotransmitter, right? And so at very high levels, it actually shuts down your sex drive. And this is one of the reasons that a lot of times SSRI drugs, which is a category of antidepressants like Prozac, can come with a side effect of low sex drive or delayed and weaker orgasm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, high circulating levels in the brain. And on the opposite side of that, low levels can actually magnify sex drive. And so in some people with depression, this can also lead to sex addiction. And then with low serotonin, women also have orgasms faster and easier. And in men, it's kind of the same thing. Like they just use and lose it like real quick. So if that's a problem, it's something to consider, especially if there's a history of any kind of depression or trouble falling asleep or like mood disorders with either like, easy ejaculation or, like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I actually have worked with a number of men who have had that issue of just not being able to hold their semen in long enough to meet their partners, their woman, usually a woman, their woman's needs. And so looking at their serotonin levels is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. It can really help. So those are kind of all the key players. So, where I think about this for women is like during the phases of the menstrual cycle. And kind of, now, of course, every woman's different, but, in the beginning of our cycle, right after a woman has had her period or during that, all of our hormones go to their lowest point in most cases. And then as a woman approaches mid-cycle, I know this is all stuff you talk about all the time. So as we go to mid-cycle, we have a surge of estrogen caused by the brain trying to get the body to ovulate. And then and testosterone actually also spikes at that time. So this will tend to make a woman more both aggressive and receptive at the same time.
That's peak time, ladies. Take advantage of that time.
And that's short-lived. It's usually a couple of days, one day where there's a distinct spike, but a couple of days where those hormones are taking their action. And then, so, that shift in hormones can explain why women are just as interested in sex, sometimes more than cuddling, or sometimes they're more into the emotional bonding or just the comfort of skin on skin, and other times they're more like, can I swear?
Yeah.
It's not like good old uncomplicated, like romp in the hay,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then, so women with higher testosterone levels in general may tend to have more of the aggressive type sex drive, and women who tend higher in estrogen might have more of the seductive or receptive. And, so one of the ways that we see high testosterone in women is in women who fall into the category of having an endocrine disorder called PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome. And it's actually the most common hormone disorder in women. It's estimated to be 1 in 10. So that's a whole nother conversation. But, if you have PCOS, that can actually, and you have high testosterone levels, then, that could explain some of that. And then many women are going to notice that their libido is going to peak premenstrually, which is weird, right? Because we were talking about how in the second half of the cycle, progesterone is dominant. Yeah. We talked about progesterone kind of dampening the sex drive. But what happens is that right before our period, our progesterone levels start to decline. And there comes a point where that declines relative to the testosterone levels, because our testosterone levels don't change with the cycle as much. And so, what happens is that makes us more sensitive genitally and easier to orgasm during progesterone withdrawal. Yeah. And so for the same reason, some women can actually experience more desire during their period. But then also serotonin levels drop then as well because of the shift in estrogen. And so during that time, that can make someone more grouchy or irritable or mean, which is like a great combo, horny and mean.
Yeah, your partner's gonna love that.
So,
yeah. It is so good. It is so helpful. And this is what I just, as far as, being a sexologist, teaching sexuality, and, Brie, I know this is so valuable and so important for you too, the way that you teach hormones and really helping people understand what's going on inside of their bodies. It makes all the emotional stuff so much more easy to handle. You're like, okay, it's okay that I feel this way right now, because this is what's happening in my bloodstream right now,
Yeah, there's that big aha, like, oh, okay, finally, that makes sense. Right?
Yeah. And still you have the emotions that you have, but at least you know why you're having them. So
some context is helpful.
Yeah.
Helps us be less judgmental, less impartial, and more the observer,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's recap. Let's recap the hormones real quick.
Okay. Yeah. So we have the DHEA.
Then we had
in
order. We did oxytocin, estrogen,
progesterone,
testosterone
with dopamine. Oh, we mentioned prolactin in there.
Okay.
And then we also talked about serotonin.
Yeah. So we gave you 7, 2 bonuses.
And the cool thing is, like, all of these are things that you can test, or if not directly, you can test reflections of their function in the body. So like, you know, clinically, it's kind of like, oh, it's great to have all this information.
Yeah.
Cool, now what? And there's so many ways we can interface with the hormonal system, whether it's like Qigong practices, or whether it's with bioidentical hormones, or whether it's something in between, like working on the underlying systems that help to optimize our own hormone production, right?
Absolutely.
So anytime someone comes to me and says, you know, okay, this is like a big issue for me, or even if they don't think it's a big issue, but then we start talking about it and it's like, yeah, okay, actually, you know, I'll look at those things. I'll look at those hormones on some testing and just see if there are obvious red flags that some of those areas are either deficient or excessive or out of balance with each other. And we can work to change that.
Yeah. That's the beauty. That's the beauty of hormones. You can always like work to change them. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So, and the first step too, if you want to know more about what's going on with you hormonally, Brie has an awesome gift for you. She is offering her hormone assessment quiz for you. So you can take a fun little quiz online, and that will give you kind of the next steps on knowing more about, you know, what's going on inside.
Absolutely. And I also actually recently put out a free PDF that's like a hormone guide to like what's up with your hormones when you have certain symptoms. So I can give you the link for that also. And if people are interested, they can grab that for free too.
Okay. That's so generous. Thank you so much. That's so wonderful.
Absolutely.
Well, cool. This has been so much fun. My computer got so hot, I had to shift gears. So that's how hot our hormone conversation was. And any final words of wisdom or anything you want to leave our listeners with?
I don't know. No, just safeguard your hormone health. You have a body and a brain and bones and a heart, and you want to live a long life. You're going to want good hormone levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a longevity practice.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's been such fun. So much fun. If anybody has any questions for me or for Brie, if you have any comments, or if you're out like, oh my God, I never knew that. That's so good to know. Then we want to hear from you. So go over to the Facebook private page. It's Alchemy of Sex. Just put that in your search bar and we'll be over there talking to you. And this interview is going to be for free for 72 hours. So share it with your friends, listen to it again, take notes, go back through it. And if you want to buy the entire summit, it's a really good deal. It's $39.99. And it's all that money is going to charity. It's all going to Women for Women International. So this summit is really to support a greater cause. So go ahead and purchase the summit, own all this good stuff for yourself for life, and donate while you're doing it. So thank you again, Brie. So fun to have you, and so much love. I love you, babe.
Thank you.
And we'll see you on the next one. Okay, ciao for now.